And go ahead and get started with this. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Walker, and I am the Executive Director of the Digital Services Coalition. I am pleased to host today's DSC webinar session on RFIs and Market Research, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As part of this educational webinar series, the DSC is bringing together topics and conversations that impact both government and industry in the hopes that we can work together to crack the code on improving digital transformations in the government. With me today is an outstanding panel of acquisition and industry experts who are going to have the opportunity to showcase their knowledge and expertise around a topic that we all know a little bit about, but sometimes leaves us scratching our heads wondering what the other side is thinking. As many of you can tell by looking at our guests, this is a place where my worlds are colliding with my former coworkers and now with my new role in the DSC. So I'm very excited that the US Digital Service Procuremenati and representatives of the DSC members have joined us today to geek out on an important procurement topic. So now I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves by telling us a little bit about their background and their current role and the work that they're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with Mark Junda.
Hey everyone, my name is Mark Junda. I am at USDS, been here for coming up on 2 years now. Worked at a bunch of agencies at USDS, and for the past 6 or 7 months have been kind of matrixed over to the VA supporting CTO's office and their acquisitions. Prior to USDS, I was at VA for a long time, contracting officer, and then a director within the procurement shop, the Technology Acquisition Center.
Thank you, Mark. Camille.
Hey everyone, I'm Camille Hogan. I am a procurement expert at USDS. I've been there about 2.5 years now. I have about 15 years of experience in contracting in the government. Prior to joining USDS, I was with Department of Transportation, and I started my career at GSA. While I've been at USDS, like Mark, I've scrubbed in on many different projects with many different agencies. Spent a lot of time at CDC and still dabble over there, and then as well have been working with USDA with WIC modernization.
All right. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Tracy. Nice to be with everybody this afternoon. I'm Frank McNally, an acquisition strategist at the United States Digital Service. I've been doing a couple of different things. I think my favorite project so far has been writing childtaxcredit.gov to help parents and families take advantage of all of their 2021 tax benefit for child raising, I guess. Did some cool stuff with them around information architecture, content development, and also a little bit of procurement work. So happy to be here with you all today, and look forward to it.
Okay, great. And from our industry side, we have Heather Cottle.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Heather. I'm the Director of Federal Health with Oddball. We're an SDVOSB that specializes in digital modernization, agile, DevSecOps, and human-centered design. I've been with Oddball for only about 2 months now, but I've known about them for quite a while. I've been in the industry for about 10 years. I come from a cyber background.
Thank you very much, Heather. Dan Levinson.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm Dan Levinson. I am president of Agile 6. I was also the founding president and a board member for the Digital Services Coalition. And prior to that, I worked at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services as a contracting officer and digital services advisor.
All right. And finally, last but not least, Brett Voller.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm Brett Voller. I've been with Mabomo also about 2 months, and we're in a very similar line of business that Oddball is. So I won't hash that over again. I recently spent 3.5 years working at Parsons Corporation, mostly on satellite communication technology, and I have been in government contracting, primarily with the DoD, but also county, state, city level for 16 years. And I'm a proposal manager.
Great, thank you very much. So you know a lot about having to respond to RFIs at this point, I'm sure.
Yeah. I'll share a little bit of it today.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into our discussion. I'm going to lead a bit of a moderated panel of discussion, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. But if you have questions during this, feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll address those with the panelists as we get through towards the Q&A period. So when we were coming up with this topic, we realized that there was quite a bit of confusion about what RFIs really serve as a purpose. Why does government do them? What do they want to see? How is industry supposed to reply to them? How much information do we give? How important is it that industry actually replies to them? So this conversation kind of came out of a lot of different discussions around that, and maybe some frustrations a little bit. So we just wanted to have kind of an open discussion around what is it really when we're looking between these, what we're looking for when we post the RFI or when industry needs to respond to it. So we want to start with the good and kind of going in from what are successes and why are RFIs used and what are they really meaningful and helpful to do. So I'm going to start with Mark again, but I just wanted to know, do you have an example of what one of your favorite RFI experiences to date from your perspective in the government?
Yeah, I'll actually go with one we did just recently, and we kind of finished up today. Now this, won't fit every circumstance, but we have our IDIQ in VA that we leverage at the CTO's office with a handful of good vendors. And so the way we've been doing RFIs is we release a PWS and get comments or we get questions sent back to us. We try to answer those questions in written form, which is pretty typical. But beyond that, after we answer them in written form, we always like to meet with all the vendors and allow an opportunity for a follow-up discussion that they could dig into any of the answers that maybe we had provided that were unclear, or it gives our product folks or the product leads, whoever, an opportunity to maybe share a little more context, or if they thought the vendors were kind of missing anything, an opportunity to kind of talk directly with them. It's more conversational. And so this morning's was on a machine learning requirement, and it was really interesting because you could see that through the Q&A, both sides were kind of missing each other and what the exact requirement was. And so just a 30-minute call that ended up scheduled for 30 minutes ended up being about 25 minutes. We got to clear up a lot of misunderstanding and really get a better understanding of what the requirement was, which is going to save us tremendously going forward. So kind of having, now again, it won't work in every instance because you might have 50 vendors interested. You might not be able to do this, but when possible, having that second follow-up and kind of a conversational dialogue to really drill down, I think was beneficial.
Thank you for that, Mark. Frank, do you have any favorite RFI experiences?
This one's from the Wayback Machine, but when I was at TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, we were federalizing screening at all the nation's airports. And so we needed a lot of not only infrastructure, but products to sort of build out the screening checkpoints. And I remember one customer came to us with sort of this spec for what's called a divestiture table, which you'll see, it's where you unpack your bags in line, those big steel tables. We wanted something crazy like with a hydraulic lift and all these different sort of things to meet OSHA standards. Long story long, we did an RFI and found from vendors that actually like restaurant tables for food prep fit this spec immediately, and far less expensively than the kind of prototype that we had been built. And we ended up buying hundreds of these things and saved, gosh, I don't even remember, in inflation adjusted terms today, probably billions of dollars. But it was really neat to kind of get that information back from industry to inform a requirement that we had, and end up, buying a table that served our purpose and didn't cost us much more than, a couple $100 a pop.
That's always fun when you get those surprising results that came out of nowhere. So Camille, kind of leveraging that, has there ever been a time when you've used the results of an RFI to kind of positively impact the resulting acquisition or requirements to get a better result, where you've taken that information that kind of came in and changed, or saw that was going to make a different scenario for you than what you originally went in?
Yeah, absolutely. In my previous job, when I was working with Department of Transportation, I worked on a project called Forces to Flyers, and the premise was getting recently released veterans into flight training to kind of address the pilot shortage in the nation. So it was kind of like a pilot program, we called it. But basically we had this group of transportation specialists, but we didn't really know, like, it was really hard for us to figure out what it would look like to do this training across the country and how we would price it and what we would make the requirements and like how we would be able to track it as a contract. So we did an RFI out to the market and we got a lot of interesting feedback. So we were able to then kind of like use that as a leverage point to then reach out to a lot of the different training schools and flight schools and universities that responded to like really dig into those conversations. And that helped us steer towards like how we were even going to build a government estimate for this and like what requirements were feasible and what things did we have on our wish list that were just like not going to happen in this program and like really weren't great for like kind of this MVP of this process. So I think it's really good to open that and not just assume that we know everything and like really get feedback from the people that would be performing on a contract to understand kind of how best it can work for both parties.
Great. Thank you so much, Camille. So I'm going to kick it over to industry and kind of hear the other side of this. So what is an RFI that you've responded to that had a positive outcome? What factors went into making it that way? So I'm going to start with Heather.
We have actually had a couple. The first was we responded to an RFI, and then the following week we were invited into a conversation with the government. So sometimes industry feels like we submit RFIs and they go into a black hole and we'll never hear anything again. But it was really great to have them reach out to us, to have that transparency, be able to ask questions. They asked us questions. And it showed that they genuinely valued our feedback and were looking to make a change and get that feedback rather than seeking validation or just checking a box. And then, like I said, I've been with Oddball for 2 months, but there was an opportunity that came out and the RFI was due shortly before I joined Oddball. So after I joined, I knew it was a really good opportunity for us, but I missed the RFI response. So I reached out to the contracting officer and I let them know the deal. I was very honest with them. And I said, hey, would you mind if I still submitted our RFI response? We're very interested in this and we want to be a really strong partner to you. And the contracting officer was actually very appreciative and impressed that I did that. And she said, absolutely, please submit your RFI response. So it's also nice to see that she also genuinely wanted our feedback and wanted to know our capabilities.
So from our friends from the government side, you guys have had those before where the RFIs come in late and you're still willing to kind of, accept that. So what advice would you give industry on kind of like missing the deadlines, or what are the deadlines out there for and how do you kind of use them? It's up for grabs. And please, everybody else, please try to put yourself on mute.
Yes, so I think the RFI deadline date is more just to kind of organize responses, but it's not a hard and fast date like a solicitation due date or proposal due date. So there is definitely some leeway, and if a vendor misses it, especially if they have a valid excuse like Heather did, the contracting officer should be accommodating to something like that. And I would probably just explain it. There's no reason why they couldn't include it unless you're well after the government's already reviewed them and kind of made some decisions.
Anything else, Frank or Camille?
Yeah, I mean, there's no harm in turning one in. I mean, even reaching out just to let them know it's coming in, not even asking like, hey, do you mind? But like, hey, we saw this, we really think we could add value. Here it is, or we're going to send it over in a couple of days. Hope it's useful. Never discourage anything like that. Any opportunity to get in the inbox of the contracting office never hurts.
Yeah, it could be important too, because if you're that maybe third type of small business, the third SDVOSB, the third 8A that submits a valid response, like that could direct the solicitation to a set aside. So it's really important that you get that in and you're considered.
Yeah, and I would also say too, like market research is continual. So even if you're a couple days late and it's like a strategy's already been determined and you're not great for that requirement, then you're developing a relationship so that like you're another potential source for another future requirement. But all that being said, like don't wait weeks and months to submit an RFI if you're missing the deadline. Like Mark said, it's for organization, but then at the same time, sometimes, there's those hard drivers on the government side saying, it's only out for 10 days. We got to make a decision 5 days after that, all of that kind of thing. But like, I always lean towards all market research is good market research. Not every government office is like that, but a lot of the ones we work with are.
So kind of leading off with that, Dan, do you prefer an RFI or another form of industry engagement prior to an actual solicitation being released?
Sure, and I think in the theme of our great government partners here, I mean, I think really the answer is, it depends, and it's really in the spirit of this continuous and ongoing market research. And I think it's really about feedback loops. And I think understanding from the government side, really in that role of business advisor, there's not a one size fits all. So I think it's really just having an open dialogue. And we as an SDVSB company we're on the other side, or still are on the other side of the market research that Mark referred to for the CEDAR IDIQ vehicle. And I think we really appreciate that it's not, prescriptive and rigid. It really just responds to what are the needs. If they're, hey, vendors, are there confusion here? Should we meet? Should we have a chat? So I think an RFI is a really great tool, but I think just really appreciating and understanding that, we don't always know all the needs from the government, the timeline, the kind of whether it's a set aside or competition and all that. So really just communicating the best that government can, and kind of keeping industry in the loop, and just being really clear so we can make educated decisions about kind of the return on investment as a small business, if it makes sense for us to respond.
Thanks, Dan. And Brett, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a small business, it's absolutely a concern, but absolutely, and I've worked at two recently, for a large business, it's a concern too. At Parsons Corporation, we were trying to put out 40 RFI responses a year just for my business unit. So that was overhead like anything else. The team wasn't dissimilar to the team we would stand up to do an RFP response. We are applying Shipley methods to it oftentimes. So to answer your question, what I think is the preferred device in a vacuum for making an entree into an opportunity would be something in between a sources sought and an RFI is what I prefer. And one of the big determination in terms of how much bandwidth you need to spend on it is whether or not they're asking for things like past performance in the RFI vehicle. My reaction to that is always like, you're going to get that in the RFP, and it's not going to influence your decisions moving forward. So the ones I like are the ones that say things like, either please indicate your past performance, but don't elaborate, or just say whether or not you have commensurate past performance. So just to be the proposal manager, industry voice on this call, I would say that we definitely think about how much money it's going to cost us to engage in these activities. And while in my 16 years, I see tremendous value in starting a conversation with the government before going on to a full RFP and helping them steer it, also to convey information to them like budgetary concerns. Hand to God came up this morning where we were going to tell the government in an RFI response that their budgetary expectations might not be aligned quite correctly. It definitely has to be a sweet spot between, is it helping industry understand what we want, and how much time do they really need to spend on it? And it's a cost-benefit relationship between how much work it's going to be on our end and how valuable it is to the government in ultimately getting to their RFP.
Thank you on that. I'm going to kind of tee off that one a little bit to go into a bit more of the discussion around a little bit more around the bad. So you brought up a good term, between the sources sought and requests for information, and there's sometimes confusion around that. So I want to dive into that a little bit. So there's requests for information that are really trying to get market information to solve a problem, but may not have a resulting solicitation, an RFI that's going to result in a solicitation, but the government can't specifically say or promise that something's going to come out. And then also you mentioned the sources sought notice, where you're looking for companies that can do what it is that government is trying to do specifically. So I wondered, Camille, if you can provide any more information that might help clear up the confusion or ways to help industry understand what government is looking for and why.
Yeah, I guess I always think of like RFI is just a great way to pressure test ideas. So I was on the team I'm on with WIC at USDA. We put out an RFI on the Federal Register to open it up to really like anybody and everybody that had some thoughts or ideas around this topic. So we really wanted to pressure test some ideas that we had been spinning with multiple audiences, and at the same time get feedback on like what are risks identified with our modernization plans, like where are some areas we should be looking at, but also just like really get conversations going on like who has been thinking about this topic for a while. Like, are there repeatable processes from maybe not WIC, but like another subject area that we could really bring into our strategy? So that was, and I think we also intentionally put it on a place that wasn't just for procurements. We really wanted to open it up so that we could get potential users to give us some feedback. We had some state agencies respond. And I think that was really like a great dialogue to open for us, and also helped us with our stakeholders at WIC saying like, look at all the responses we got and from this diverse group. So it wasn't just like, we are thinking that we're going to do a procurement and tell us if you have capabilities, but really kind of like changing the questions a little bit so that we made it a little bit more open-ended, and really was more of like a, let's pressure test these ideas. And let's not pretend we have anything fully baked quite yet. So I feel like that was the first step. And then I would say that like, I tend to use sources sought in the very traditional, like, do you have the capabilities? This is how we're going to figure out what kind of set aside we're going to do, or if we need to do this open market. But I always think RFIs are a little bit more flexible, and it's really just opening the door to future conversations.
Great. Mark or Frank, any other thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so going through the RFI process, every stakeholder kind of has what they want out of it. You have the program office who maybe wants to find different technologies or potential vendors. Maybe you have the acquisition group that wants to find, what vehicle to solicit on and socioeconomic factors and things. Then you have the vendors who, want awareness of what's going on and the opportunity to kind of help shape the requirement in some form and get to know the requirement a little bit more intimately. There's things beyond that, but like primarily, that's kind of what we're all in it for. So to have someone, and Camille, sounds like you kind of had this, that sees all of that and can bring all that together in one unified RFI or like series of interchanges, but like sees the holistic nature of that and can achieve that for the program office. I think that's really important. Too often each stakeholder just focuses on their little spot. Program office talks to some vendors and ships it over to contracting, and contracting posts an RFI just to find out where vendors are and who they are, and it's a little bit more disjointed. So I think it's really important to work cohesively as the whole team with vendors in mind too.
Great, thank you. I think one of the other challenges a lot of times between the RFI process being useful is that sometimes it tends to be the catch-all as well for market research. The Office of Federal Procurement Policy has published several myth-busting memos, and one of their most recent ones, they posted that one of the myths is that the best way to engage with industry during the planning phase is through the written RFI, saying that that was their myth. And they're saying that the response to this myth was that RFIs, while useful, can result in a static one-way exchange where agencies don't have the resources to respond and vendors don't have the opportunity to demo their capabilities, and that RFIs should not mirror proposal submissions. So if this is the case where OFPP and a lot of other groups and things like that, especially in the digital service scenario where we're talking about more communication and more open conversations, why are there still so many RFIs, and why is government not being as creative as they can to really engage industry? And then also, how can industry influence the decisions to release or not release an RFI? Frank, I'll kick it off to you to start with that.
I think I've been thinking about this since we met early last week or early this week. I can't tell. They're all running together already. It's hard. I don't think our workforce, our 1102 workforce, is that good at market research. And I also don't think they understand if it's their job or the program office's job. Like if you talk to people, they're like, oh, it's program's job to do market research, or programs like, well, it's everybody's job to do market research. And RFIs aren't really a method of doing they are a method of doing market research, but not the best method of doing market research. It punts a lot of the effort of getting to know what you're buying. And I've always said, there's nothing more important to acquisition than understanding what you're going to buy. If you don't do that by reading papers or calling vendors and having conversations about their goods and services, you're not going to get it from an RFI response. That's for sure. So I think part of it, unfortunately, is that we punt some of the effort onto industry to check this market research box so that we can write on some business clearance memorandum that, yes, we have conducted market research. We did an RFI. Let us just get on with the process. So that's the type of thing that frustrates me. Prior to joining USDS, worked for a startup that was trying to solve this, a company called Public Spend Form that runs a service called GovShop. And their whole thing was, we don't really need RFIs to understand how many socioeconomic concerns are in a particular NAICS code or PSC code. Like, we can figure this out on our own. But it's certainly not easy. You know, not every company wants to sell to government. The tools we have right now, whether it's FPDS NG or, you know, USA Spending, they're not easy to navigate. So I certainly don't want to suggest that it's easy to do, but it's just effort that should be taken. And you should use the RFI to fill in gaps in knowledge, not to create the foundation of knowledge. I'll stand off my soapbox for now, because I'm sure the other few people want to have a comment here.
Camille or Mark?
I think Frank brings up a few good points. One thing that kind of triggered me is like the business clearance document, that it's also like a larger problem, that like a lot of, you know, routine reviews on the government side. It's like, oh, well, you talked to all these vendors, but did you do an RFI? Like, do you have something to put in the file to show that you actually got these written documents? I always lean towards like an RFI is just opening the door, but there's so much more to market research. And it's not even the first step, but it's like, it can be a tool in the toolbox. I think one thing that I consider too is like, and I'm really interested to hear from my fellow industry panelists, like, what is a good way to kind of pulse the market to, yeah, we can figure out which like vendors are in this NAICS code and which different small business set-asides, but how do we know who has time to actually take on this work? And like, how do we know who's actually interested in this space? And what's a good way for us to steward our government partners so that it's not like, write us a 20-page dissertation on why you think you would be great for this project, but let us like signal to us that you're interested so we can keep the conversation going. And I think it's like, also from a competition perspective, we really want to always be like making these opportunities as broadly known as possible so that we can find new companies and like continue to increase competition on the government side. So like, I'm honestly in a little bit of a conundrum on what's the best way to do it. So I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say.
Camille, I've seen a few kind of out of the box thinking ways recently. Obviously, one-on-one meetings would be my preference, but I know that that's not always realistic. So we've been able to engage with government through virtual events or in-person events like industry days, agency-specific conferences, networking events. Recently, we attended the Fed Health IT Innovation Awards, and it was really great to see some feds there, meet them, highlight Oddball. We're going to an agency-specific conference later this year that we're really excited about. I think a lot of people know that the small business officer for NIH and CMS has done a really great job at engaging with industry through virtual happy hours and conferences. She invites everyone, it's open, and she's created a really strong community of interested and engaged vendors that really hold on to every word she says about every opportunity that she talks about. I also have seen there's an agency that created their own kind of community forum / social media website to engage with industry. It allows us to answer questions, ask questions. They put drafts out there. We get to see who else is interested in opportunities so we can talk about teaming. So that gets us excited. And we're also starting to see government become more innovative with the method that they release information in RFIs. So instead of these really long documents that are page after page of Times New Roman size 12 font, we're getting PowerPoint presentations with graphics and tables and colors. So there is outside of the box thinking that is incredibly appreciated and well received by industry. And we are going to participate. If you give us the opportunity, we will participate.
Thank you, Heather. So kind of going with the industry questions on that one. One of the challenges that we've heard, and I heard it from both sides now, both in government and now working in with industry, is that responding to an RFI sometimes releases too much of a proprietary solution. We don't want to respond because we don't want to give away too much of our, our solution and what is going to make us special. But also on the other hand of that, if you don't give enough information, then the government might not have the way to write the requirements that allows for you to even propose what that solution is, or that you had critical, information that could have helped change the strategy or anything. So what is a good way, what are ways to give good information to government without harming your chances or revealing too much, kind of in this, I call it the catch-22 scenario. So Dan?
Yeah, and I'll maybe take a little different approach to answering this. And I think, you know, as a non-traditional government contractor, we kind of reject that proprietary and capture mindset, you know, really default to open. And, you know, I think it's really the system governments and procuring technology has been built on, but, you know, the proprietary mindset, you know, and this is some of my experience being a contracting officer as well on the other side, you know, can often lead to poor outcomes, things like vendor lock, you know, where companies get in and then it gets really difficult to move off a solution, whether it's the right thing or not the right thing. And, you know, I think it really stems from at times and creates this like scarcity mindset where it often causes companies to kind of have to hold their solutions tight. And it almost creates an environment sometimes where for a vendor to win, the government needs to lose. They need to say, well, we need to lock the government into this solution. And, you know, I think we try to come from a place of abundance and believe that if we share good ideas, that, you know, someone is going to benefit. And we also have confidence in our ability to deliver on those ideas. And I think, you know, we really take the approach that technology changes, especially on the kind of agile and fast moving contracts that we work on. It changes so quickly that any proprietary solution is going to kind of quickly be obsolete. And it's not necessarily the right thing to do outside of just trying to lock the government into a solution. And really what we try to express is the ability to retain, attract and keep and create a good atmosphere for just talented folks to work. Because I think it really is about the people first and foremost, at least on the services side that we work on. So yeah, I mean, I think that's not necessary. I think, you know, just again, just taking that different approach, because I do think it creates this difficult situation where if, you know, people are saying, well, we have this one thing that is the secret sauce, you know, again, I think it just fundamentally has led to poor outcomes across, you know, the procurement ecosystem, especially in technology as things kind of evolve.
Yes, Ms. Gunnan.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, that's always rung so hollow to me to hear businesses talk about their secret sauce, like your industry best practices or your global reach, all these, you know, I was in Big Four management consulting in the past. And I mean, unless you're like in manufacturing or robotic, there's really very little like proprietary information that you could divulge in a written RFI response that would harm your business down the road. So like, I think that's sort of just lip service. You know, whatever it is that you're responding to an RFI, if you don't want to divulge it, that's fine. Don't do it. But I don't see that as a preclusion to the government going out and asking for input on requirements or asking for, you know, you could even mark something as business proprietary when you send it back over. I don't think there's any restriction in doing that if you're responding to some of these things, but I've always gotten a pretty hearty chuckle out of hearing business leaders say, "Oh, we don't want to divulge our special thing," like that's going to win it anyway, right?
No, I think so. Back to one story when I was a contracting officer, one company came and they marked proprietary their like secret 12-step approach to Agile, and we got a good chuckle out of that in the office for I think the reasons you mentioned there, Frank. So.
The not so secret sauce, huh? So kind of along with that, without revealing too much of your secret sauce, Brett, if you could tell us like what are typical considerations that you think about or wish that government would think about when deciding to respond to an RFI? Like, how do you make that kind of decision that you're going to say, okay, we're going to invest in this beyond just, okay, yes, we want to, yes, it's government, we're going to, you know, we're hungry, but what are things that like from the business perspective, you know, kind of really help drive or that would be information that even government would like to know that helps them understand if they're putting something out that says, what should we think about, or how do we give you consideration if we really want you to respond to this?
Yeah, you know, I think we're always looking for, are they really telling us how we can win? You know, are they revealing, you know, a phrase we use in a shred all the time is, it's not on the page, but if you read the tea leaves, you know, that's what we're always trying to do, is figure out what is part of decorum and what is part of them revealing their actual intentions for this eventual solicitation. And then in terms of deciding whether or not I want to respond, besides the things I already invoked before in terms of a cost benefit analysis and the amount of overhead that you need to dedicate to one of these, is what we were talking about. I want to show them secret sauce. I feel like if I have something to convey to them, something to put in their ear early on, I want to be able to do that. And I do have secret sauce all the time, but it's not these schmaltzy things, that Dan and Frank are talking about. They're things that take decades to develop in many cases. It could be things like having a really good automated scheduling system for satellites, like in my last role. Or it could be having a combination of hardware with custom software that allows you to test satellite ground communications without having to use literally millions and millions of dollars of government equipment that you have to rent on an hourly basis for hundreds of thousands of dollars and so on. So it's not the kind of things that industry is going to be able to take away from you ever. I think Dan was talking about, or Frank was talking about the 12 steps to agile that they didn't want people to know. Like, that made me crack up. I was glad I was on mute because I kind of lost it. Yeah, it's what you would think is the overarching answer to your question. Industry is looking to spend an amount of time on it that's going to help them in some way, either by helping to steer the eventual RFP or put certain notions in the government's mind in terms of efficacy in their approach to whatever challenge they're trying to overcome. And I think they want to try to see those things on the page. And then in terms of us deciding whether or not to move forward, it's whether or not we have something good to say, I think is what it comes down to. And something that we need established early on. And then, yes, also it's just as simple as, hey, we were in line early on. If this thing comes out a year or 2 or 3 later, we're showing that we have skin in the game and that we're staying in the conversation and that it's important to us and that, we want to be a partner.
Heather, do you have any thoughts to add on that?
I do. There's a lot that goes into thinking about responding to an RFI. But the first thing is, can we do this work? And is this the type of work that we want to do? It has to be in our general wheelhouse. If an RFI comes out that is about shipbuilding, I'm obviously not going to respond to it because it's going to be a huge waste of time for everyone. But it also needs to make good business sense. What's the potential value of the contract? What's the duration of the contract? Do we know the agency and the customer? And if not, do we want to know them? And then the next thing we think about is the RFI response itself. What is it going to take? And I've seen a huge range from a simple Google form that'll take 30 minutes to input capabilities and some past performance examples to what almost looks like an RFP with over 20 pages for the response. So if it's something simple that I can do myself, or I need to figure out, do I need to pull in other resources? Do I need to have some ops people give me some information about our capabilities because this is a technical response? And then that's going to take away from supporting the customer. Or do I need our proposal manager who's currently working on 4 active proposals and it is already super busy? So one of the things that I hope government thinks about is just, what is it going to take for industry to respond? What are you asking for from us? Because it takes time to respond and time costs us money. So like Brett was saying, it's got to be worth it to us. There's got to be a value to it. And obviously we're in this business to grow our business. We're here to make money, but it just needs to make sense. And these are not decisions that I make by myself. I talk to my team about it and I have to present to them what the opportunity looks like and what the response is going to be. And we kind of talk through, does this make sense for us?
Great, thank you. So let's kick that back to the government a little bit and talk about timelines specifically. And I know we've all been subject to this one, but why do you post an RFI with a week or less response time? Do you really think industry can respond, or is it intended for a company and you're just following the process? How can industry tell? What should they be doing to respond? Give us your thoughts on that. Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll answer that, but just to kind of tie into what has already been said, a lot of times the government thinks we're like the most popular kid in school and everyone wants to be our friend, so everyone's going to jump really high when we put out an RFI. But I think as we're seeing, vendors need to make tough decisions on what they go after, and we have to cultivate the market and attract them to our requirements and get the best vendors in, because there's a very finite a pool of very quality, capable vendors, and we need to find them and make them interested. So we're like baiting the hook for the right kind of fish, so to speak. But to get to your point about like timeframes and stuff, there could be a million reasons why the timeframes are what they are. I'll never get up here and admit that we put out for a week because we know what vendor we want. I haven't seen that happen, even when you get the feeling the program office might, be comfortable with a certain vendor. But it could be just, time frame. The acquisitions back up so far and you start like counting weeks until you need to make the award. So it could be time frame. It could be just the government's misunderstanding of how much time it takes to respond. It could, be meeting certain milestones or whatever it is, but it could be a lot of things. I think part of the government's aware of that. And when they do it, they feel bad. Some of the government maybe, just throws it out there and figures vendors have endless resources, and if they want it bad enough, they'll prioritize and respond. But yeah, I mean, there's probably lots of bad reasons and maybe somewhat okay reasons to short RFI timeframes.
Frank or Camille, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mark, and I feel like I try to be really intentional, but like even just like the scoping of an RFI that we were kind of touching on earlier, like having it be like holistic and include like it just like get it to the point. But like in terms of time, I mean, you kind of also need to be realistic about what time are you releasing it? Like, are you posting it on December 23rd and having responses due January 3rd? Like, that's kind of unfair to the industry. So really thinking about like the timeframes around which you're publishing it and how long it's going to be out. And I mean, like, also just to be quite honest, like, it's not a secret that we also work in offices, or like folks work in offices where there's political pressures to get things done quickly, or like people have agreed to a timeline that isn't really feasible. So it's like, where do you cut the time? Do you cut it on the RFI end, or do you cut it on the proposal end? And like, is the RFI the only thing that's happening? Are there other conversations that are happening, kind of like these one-on-one meetings outside of just like this written communication back and forth? So I think it's like, in a vacuum, it's not fair to expect a vendor or anybody to respond in 3 days or 5 days or 10 days. But I think it really is circumstance dependent. I think like, at least for us at USDS and any project we're on, we try to advocate that like longer if possible, like think about who your audience is, think about what else is going on. And we really try to do that. And I think a lot of folks in the government try to do that as well. But you never know what you're gonna get.
Yeah, I mean, and my first 9 years of my career were all in government. And then I went into, the private sector, thinking like, it's so easy for, this is just a simple RFI. It's like 8 questions, but, then discovering how many different, there's still bureaucracy in private sector companies, especially some of the big 4 firms and some of the, larger, medium-sized companies. Like, people want to see it. They want to see, the high up in leadership wants to see what is being written. So, if you count a day or two for that review process, the people that you want to hear from, and you're the government, you want to hear from these industries, they might only have 48 hours to put responses together before they've got to get it into that review cycle. So, Camille's right. There's political pressures. There's all types of different pressures on why an RFI might have a shortened time frame. But it's just important to keep in mind that 5 days is just drastically little time. And if you want good quality, you got to give quality. You got to give the amount of time for quality.
I think too, where we've seen that is we talked about it earlier, the rubber stamp. Did you do an RFI? Yes, I did an RFI. And here's the rubber stamp that shows us, even though the market research that you actually did was something completely different, but there's still somebody in the office that says, I need an RFI, a document, that kind of thing. And sometimes that also is misleading and unfortunately unfair, that there has to be this process that still goes out there. But kind of talking about the short time frame, but also looking at the long time frame. Sometimes there is a very long gap between when an RFI goes out and then the follow-up solicitation. Sometimes, if you're on the bigger projects, even 6 months to a year of when something has gone out from government, and then it goes into the black box, the mystery box. And I'm going to kind of pull on John Foster's question and incorporate this a little bit in here, is like, does the government actually read the RFI responses? What qualifies, for a good response, and what goes into that, black box of time from when, like, you've got 6 months between when you've done your RFI response and when the acquisition is out, and then there's market stuff that might have changed. So how is that something to kind of be factored in? Any thoughts on that, Camille?
Yeah, I mean, if the government does an RFI, they're reviewing it. Depending on how many, like who reviews it, that's questionable in every agency. I would say that it's like when you pull that the cover off the black box, like sometimes like an example of an RFI that the government's trying to test, should we buy this thing or build it? And then you kind of get a bunch of different responses from industry, and there's many different stakeholders on the government side that can't agree on a strategy. And I think that like that kind of thing happens quite often, that drags out timelines. Budgets change, budgets get pulled, the requirements have to change after an RFI is done. I think that happens a lot too. And I also wanted to, I'm just going to harken back to a point from the last piece of the conversation, talking about like the short turnaround times, or even sometimes like these long gaps. I think what's also really great about talking about like cultivating this vendor community and these relationships is when you post an RFI or you post something like that, something I always do is go back to all the companies I've talked to and said, hey, here's an opportunity. Like, I really want to make sure that you get a chance to see this RFI. And I know the timeline's short, or we don't really know what the timeline's like ahead, but we would really like to hear your thoughts on this. And I think keeping those relationships open are super important. But yeah, in terms of like the gap between an RFI and 6 months later, a totally different procurement comes out of it. I think it's like, we don't want to talk about how the sausage is made, but sometimes it's messy in government.
Thank you. And before we get to Q&A, one more shot over to the industry side of things. Kind of thinking about that, and talking about the timelines and stuff, what other factors besides time would make you not really want to respond to an RFI? What are things that are like big red flags for you to be like, yeah, okay, we've talked about, yeah, there's certain strategies you might put into play, but what are just no-nos that you see and you're just like, nope, walking away from that one. And this might be good for government to hear a little bit about that, because it might help with clearing up the mystification a little bit. So I'll start with Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And as mentioned, as kind of a non-traditional company, we don't have a traditional capture team or BD or sales traditional people there, and really working in like lean cross-functional teams. Myself, others, came from government, whether state or federal. And I think, one thing we look at is, do we believe in this solution? Is this going to be, part of making progress, part of helping users, good spend for taxpayers? And I think if it's yes, then it's, do we have a role that we can play here? Again, trying to take that like abundance mindset. Not every even awesome, important piece of work, we don't need to play a role or shouldn't play a role in everything. So, I think to the point of the question of what doesn't, if we don't believe in the work, or we don't think maybe it's too rigid or prescriptive of an approach, they're not leaving room in the scope for empiricism. That's going to be something that's, going to deter us from responding. I think kind of understanding the business side from non-traditional vendors, the type of roles that we like to bring. We are not, it's not the same roles that maybe from a traditional IT project 5-10 years ago, right? And I think understanding, whether it's product folks and the value of research and design and those type of things. So making sure there's alignment there. I think it's really important too, the partnership. And I think as Camille kind of mentioned, just the willingness for government to reach out and just be clear about, hey, have you responded to this? We think you may be a good fit. Obviously, there's no promises from that, but that really means a lot because, we, again, kind of coming from that place of abundance, we just have faith that the right opportunities will come up for us, where we can really fit in. And not to say we wait for a call from government by any means for those, but being very lean, we don't always have time to be responsive to every single piece of market research. So we love it when someone tags us and say, hey, just wanted to make sure you saw this thing, on GSA or FedBizOps or this thing that's out there. And if you're interested, and sometimes it's just a capacity thing, we can't respond, but that's really helpful. So I kind of answered more what we're looking for, but I think it would just be that lack of partnership or communication, rigid prescriptive requirements, lack of understanding of the business from the non-traditional perspective.
Brett, real quick, any additional thoughts, or Heather?
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, the biggest factor not related to the previous question for me is if they reached out to us. Everywhere I've ever worked, if the government reaches out to us and says, we would like you to respond to this RFI, we're going to do it. Even if it is just they need to put one in the file, we want to help them do that. current workload is probably right up there. You know, if I've got 3 major RFPs on the table, I'll let an RFI go all day long, even if it was, you know, something that looked like it was right up our alley that we normally would have responded to. And then earlier I talked about the tea leaves. You know, I'm looking to see if they care, if it's a project they care about. Now, regardless of whether I'm ultimately going to end up bidding on the RFP, if I can tell from the way they wrote it, if there's misspellings, if there's problems rendering the table of contents, if they've clearly sourced literature from other solicitations, doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to bid on the RFP. It might have no impact on it at all. They're still going to buy something if they don't care about it, if they're going down this road. But the RFI, they probably don't, if they don't care about the project, they're just going to put them in a drawer, and then they're going to evaluate the RFP is the way I look at it, whether that's true or not. I definitely consider how much competition there is, and if I'm just going to be a drop in the bucket in terms of the opinions that are coming across and get lost in the shuffle after spending a whole Shipley process on it. And how memorable or impactful whatever I'm going to write about is going to be certainly factors into it as well.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple questions from the audience that are written in the chat, and I'll open it up to see if anybody else has any more. But there was, as I've already kind of thrown John's in already. And I think then the other one we have is kind of a little back and forth on if the timeframes are short, the government should accommodate a more thorough response. Mark kind of responded to that. But in that smaller response, is that something more of like an end product, like a Google form versus a white paper versus a longer response? Like, you know, kind of what helps the government read or get through things that you like to see in the response to RFIs? Or what are some examples of things that you've seen that really kind of stand out or help make it easy for you to review them, if you can think of anything?
So I asked the question. I'm happy to kind of help clarify.
Sure.
I was more thinking. So I'm in the Air Force. So on my side, if my team has like a true quick turn, what would be like a reasonable end product to request? Right. Definitely understand a succinct response, but if it sounds like a Google form is an easy thing. But what else would be an easy response vice, like a massive, you know, borderline proposal type response? Over.
Brett, Heather, Dan.
I would say go with the sources sought, and you know, make it clear you don't want a ton of information, because if you're nebulous, they're going to apply the Shipley method to it and just, you know, give you a tsunami of information to just try to drown out the other voices that they're going to be getting back. So like I mentioned past performance before, make it clear we would like you to invoke whether or not you have commensurate past performance. We don't need you to do a 15-page write-up. Anything that is logically going to help us make a faster churn, you want to make explicit, because believe me, somebody on the team is going to say, there's an opportunity to give them more information. Let's do it.
Yeah, and I think to that, and this is something as a former contracting officer, but also on this side, I mean, I think really being clear in setting whether it's like a 3 or 5 page limit, and you know, having some clear questions, but also giving vendors some room to deviate a little bit and say, hey, if you think there's something interesting, you get 3 pages, you get 5 pages. And then, you know, as others have referenced, you know, always it's great on both sides. I think leaving it open to, we reserve the right to bring in companies at our discretion for a conversation. That doesn't mean we're going to bring in everybody. That doesn't mean we're going to bring in anybody. But you never know what you're going to get. And, you know, to the question as far as, you know, I can speak maybe a little more freely than some of the current government folks, like, do they read things? And I always used to say there's reading things and there's really reading things. Like, you know, I would always read things that come over, but, you know, some things are really bad, right? You just receive, you know, 20, 30 responses and they're not great. And you kind of glaze over, you kind of go through it and read it. So I think the more clear and concise that you can incentivize government to be, it's a benefit for everybody, and especially the reviewers who, you know, it's a slog of a job sometimes to review all those responses.
Okay, on that note, I'm with the government. I've been a CEO for the last 20 plus years. My usual reference for an RFI, if it's short, succinct, and to the point, you know, not a lot of fluff, not a lot of BS, for lack of a better term, you know, just short, succinct, and to the point will get my attention a lot better than taking a quote professional writer and flowering it to the hilt because I don't have time to read all that. I just, and I also try to put within my RFIs, I'm saying, this is what I would like to see. I give them, a little parameter, and I usually say language saying, something short and to the point. And also, are you interested in this effort if it does move forward to a solicitation? And that
I always
helps me.
love that question from government when they say, are you interested? And we're like, yeah, we're interested. But I'll give an example of something that I saw happen. And I won't name any names, but an RFI came out from an agency on a contract vehicle that we are not on. So we didn't see it come out. We're not able to respond to it. But we had a number of different companies approach us wanting to help them craft a response and partner on it because it's the exact work that we do, and we do a really good job of it. But the response was almost like an RFP. They wanted more than 20 pages. They wanted a management approach. They wanted a technical approach. They wanted full multiple past performance write-ups. They wanted proposed personnel. I mean, it just was an insane RFI response. And all those companies that had initially approached us, once they thought about it a little bit more, they decided none of us are going to respond to it because it's just too much. And it's not like it was a $2 billion BPA that would have required a lot of technical solutions. It was a little bit more on the simple side. So I think when we look at it and the response time and what it's going to take, that's a huge factor that we consider.
And I feel like that's what I mean by sometimes the government thinks that we're the most popular person and anyone's going to do anything to respond with what we ask for. I think what we've done, and you industry panel, you can tell me if I'm incorrect here, but if like a brief RFI, just one page on when have you done something similar, and send us one artifact to support that, just so they can see something, the reviewers can see something and kind of put the two together, and within a few minutes you can kind of see whether they're a true player or whether they're just telling you a story.
I think Heather also kind of brought up a great point too, is that the scope and size of your ultimate potential acquisition also should factor into your RFI as well. And if you are asking for all of that for something a very small size, like that's way too much. And you probably don't need all that for a much larger one, but it definitely should not be a bigger work effort than what is actually going to be done in the concluding resulting acquisition, if there is one. So real quick, we kind of have another question there. It's there's a what is or can be done to help connect government contracting offices to learn from each other and develop more creative mindset. And I think, one thing we're doing is one way like this is having webinars. So thank you for any of the government contracting officers and government attendees on this. We hope that, we're able to provide good content and material and connecting, but I'll also throw that over to Camille, Frank, and Mark.
Well, Mark mentioned DITAP. I mean, that's the Digital IT Acquisition Professional Training Program. We're trying to, encourage 1102s who want to buy digital services to just appreciate how important it is to engage with industry however you can, whether it's through RFI or other. I'd love to see some type of rotational program, where industry and or government people can trade places for a little while. I think walking in the shoes of especially industry for someone who's never, been out of government can be really enlightening. Now, there's other ways to get that experience and to appreciate, what industry struggles with. But I think that type of thing, if we could ever figure out how to get around all the red tape, 6 weeks entrenched with an industry team, you'll look differently at the types of things you're writing and requesting from industry, when you get back to your seat.
I would say this might be a little bit out there, but I'm going to take a shot at it because I would have benefited from this as a contracting officer. But, like if you're a vendor and you have a good relationship with a contracting office and you see other RFIs that are really good examples, or like you're like, this was one that we were really excited about and it was like easy for us, and kind of like having that conversation, it might unlock a lot of doors for that person that's really trying to move things in their agency and then say, hey, look at this guy down the street that's like publishing RFIs in this way. Like, why don't we change our processes here? Because a lot of times it's not just the contracting officer whose name is published on the FBO posting. It's like all the people that approved it going live and all of their supervisors that are used to doing it a certain way. So just like sharing those examples, especially from the vendor side, I think in opening that conversation could be really helpful too. So it's like we can do what we can on the government side, but really being partners in that will just help make acquisitions better for all of us, I think.
Camille makes a really good point. And I was going to kind of say the same thing, but from the opposite way, because I don't want to reach out to a contracting officer and tell them, how I think they should do their job or anything. But industry is here to help, and we want to help, and we want to develop relationships. So if a contracting officer or a small business officer, anyone in the program shop ever wants to reach out to industry and say, hey, who have you seen that does a good job of this? What agency gets you excited to respond? How are people doing things? And who should we reach out to? And hopefully your counterparts at other agencies would be more than happy to walk you through how they've done things and how it's worked well for them.
Yeah, I think that Heather and Camille, those are, I just want to pipe in because I did have one situation where, a person emailed a contracting officer and said, look, this RFI is just bonkers. And they kind of replied with like, well, I had no idea. Like nobody had ever told me that this was so hard. So I wouldn't hesitate to reply and give your thoughts to it, be respectful and polite, but say, look, what you're asking for would take us 6 weeks and cost us $250,000. Like you just can't expect. And sometimes who knows, like that contracting officer might be like, I know, right? Thank you. I can't wait to go and tell the person who made me put this out there that they were wrong. Never take for granted that the CO is making the final decisions. They might love to hear that type of feedback from you because it might give them a brilliant and delicious told you so moment.
So the Emperor's
really
New
good to
Clothes
know.
strategy.
Tracy, can I have just one point onto that? And I think
Absolutely. Just real quick, want to say thank you for anybody who's still on, but if you want to hold on a little bit, still chat through a little bit of this, I'm keeping the session open, but for anybody that has to drop, thank you so much for attending. So Dan, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And I went through the 1102 kind of the training, and I think as many others here did. And I think some of the challenge are fundamentally where a lot of 1102s feel like they're put in a box, right, of what the job is and can be. And I had a really great opportunity at my time at CMS where I got to the last maybe 2.5 years. I was kind of a half-time operational CO, and the other half was a digital service advisor. And really that was almost just like outreach to the agency and to industry. And I think I met with over 100 different unique vendors the last year, and I'd go around and kind of called myself like the Johnny Appleseeds of contract, right? And just going and having conversations with people. And I think that would be really helpful, if agencies had that flexibility where, I know the workload that I had prior to that, where I had 40 some contracts that I was managing, and there just was no time to really, you kind of nurture those feedback loops and those relationships. So I think, that would be, I think it would be great if others had that opportunity, right, to be able to spend some time on some of the softer stuff and not just, always being administering contracts.
Great. Thank you. I think that's a really good point. And obviously, hopefully, with this movement and things that we're trying to keep doing, that this community, the digital transformation community can continue to make the strides that the rest of procurement can follow. I feel like we've done a lot in this space to kind of open the doors and the conversations more than some of the other more traditional paths. And hopefully these kinds of conversations can continue. And, potentially there will be blogs or information that we create from the education committee that can also help from both the government side and the industry side of how to kind of, respond or help understand a little bit more about what's going on and stuff. So thank you very much to our panelists. It was a great conversation. I don't want this to end, but thank you so much. We will have the recording of this available and sent out through if you email or if you RSVP to this, but we'll also have it on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to give some crab claws to our USDS people.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us, Tracy.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having us,
Mark. Thank you,
Tracy.
Dan. Thanks, Brett. Thank you, Camille. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you,
See ya.
Heather.